Alrighty, YouTube. Assuming you read the title, I'm going to just start this video off with a disclaimer that this is going to be more of a complainy, ranty, just very overall displeased sounding video, so fair warning there. But as for the actual content of the video, this is going to be about why you shouldn't buy a reman carburetor from Speedway Motors. So let's start off with what Speedway actually is. Speedway Motors is a company that remanufactures carburetors for multiple different reasons, performance or, just a regular one like I bought. And they're supposed to be, they're really well known and really well, they're like supposed to be the top of the market or whatever. But I bought this here carb from Speedway a few months ago. When did I buy it? Probably, I want to say January or February. And ever since I got it, the car's had problem after problem after problem, even more so than it did when I originally bought the car. The only reason that I even had to get a new carb was because I took the old carb off to rebuild it, and I didn't know anything about the computer-controlled quadrajets at the time, so I didn't pay attention to all the set screws and where exactly they were, and then I couldn't put it back together correctly, so I had to get a new one that was supposed to be set correctly. But it wasn't, so that's my first complaint. None of the screws were set correctly. The idle air bleed on the top was not set correctly. These mixture control screws were not set correctly. The idle speed was not set correctly. The throttle position screw was not set correctly or even set at all. I had to screw it all the way in. I had to do all that. You can go on my YouTube, scroll all the way back down to like almost the bottom. You can find every single one of these videos I have about these carburetors that I all had to do, not on the original carburetor, I mind you, but on the Speedway Motors one. So all that stuff, I set up the idle speed, I set up the mixture control, I set up all that stuff, and then I get this off-idle hesitation and a lean bog, right? So I was like, I went through all the steps, all the diagnosis, and everything pointed to the float level being off. So I take the air horn off, and not only is the float level set too low, but when I did this the first time, the needle wasn't even on the float. It was just sitting in the seat, and it was just sitting there. The float height had nothing to do with the needle at all because it wasn't attached. It was completely separate from it, which means that whoever put this carb together was not paying attention, and they missed that tiny little thing, which kind of got me thinking in the back of my mind, what else did they miss? If that little hook right there that holds the float to the needle, what did they miss other than that, right? But I disregarded it, put it back together, and drove it around. And it worked for about a week before it started having a lean bog again. Not as bad as it was before, but bad enough that it ended up being a problem that I wanted to address. So last weekend, I attempted to do some things with a fuel filter, like getting a less restrictive filter and putting an inline filter in instead, because I heard that was a common problem with the quadrajets, is the filter in here would clog too easily, or it wouldn't allow maximum fuel flow, and it would create problems. So I took that filter out and I put an inline filter behind the fuel pump. And then, if you saw my most recent video I posted, on Thursday last week, carburetor started on fire and burnt down a sizable portion of the engine bay and destroyed this carburetor here. It's completely, the choke housing was cracked. It's some other stuff like this here, block plate for it is cracked. See that? The heat just got to everything. Everything that's plastic is cracked or broken. Everything that's rubber is hard and brittle. So I'm in the process of rebuilding another quadrajet I had lying around. But as I'm doing that, I'm taking this one apart, and I'm noticing all these little things that really made me realize this is not put together at all like it's supposed to. The idle, the mixture control check ball that is supposed to sit behind that is gone. There's no check ball in there. The return spring for the mixture control solenoid plunger that sits right here is gone. There's no plunger. The well plug that plugs up the secondary well here that your mixture control solenoid connector sits in isn't in here either. So they're missing three things already in this boom, 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 right in this area. If you take into account for what I found last time, you know, the needle wasn't connected to the float and the float height was set wrong. So there's that. It was missing some springs. This spring that you see down in there, I put that in there because to match the other one, but that spring is from a different carburetor. It didn't have the spring behind the TPS unit that goes in there. The bushing for the choke shaft that goes through here was not, there's no bushing on it, so that would have been why it was having a lean bog, because it was sucking air through that the whole time. Which also explains why my choke was sticking when I first got it, because whoever put this together, they just slammed it together. They did not know what they were doing. They were not trained. Honestly, I think that whoever did this has never even rebuilt a quadrajet or even a carburetor. I bet you some kid just slammed it together. They really need to get their shit together with this, guys, because this is ridiculous. I paid $400 for this, and this is not the quality that you expect from $400, all right? I spent $300 on the parts car and got all those parts plus a carburetor that was in better shape than this one. So, and that's just the beginning of it. Not only that, but I noticed a couple other things that were different about this one, that were not like the other ones. For starters, the idle, or the choke pull-off, primary choke pull-off, this deal right here, is different. Not that, sorry, the one that's on there right now, on my new one, is different than the old ones, slightly. The old ones have this air bleed right here that actually has a screw behind it, and you can adjust how far this plunger goes back and forth. This one doesn't have it. This is an old-fashioned one from a regular like quadrajet from like the 60s. So it doesn't have the proper adjustments on there. Some of the linkages that went onto it were wrong that would go with the choke. They were all, you know, bent up weird, and all sorts of deals like that. Not even quadrajet matching parts, I mind you. They were just like, it looks like someone just picked it out of a junk pile and made a Frankenstein carb, to be straight honest. And probably the biggest complaint that I have of all of this, you know, the missing check ball and the missing return spring are a big one, because I'm going to explain it to you, but all this contributes to why this happened. But the secondary metering rods, these dudes right here, are the wrong rods. I'll show you that. You see that? Can the camera focus? There we go. This one right here is bent, for starters, so just ignore that, because I'm sure that happened in the fire. But see how skinny they are? Come on. There we go. The skinnier the rods are, the more gas is allowed into the carburetor, and thus the richer it will run, okay? So these are very, very rich idle secondary metering rods for your secondary chamber of the carb when you're going down the highway. These are going to be what's controlling how much gas is going in there, and they're very rich running. These are what you usually find on performance carburetors that you're going to put on like race cars and stuff, like 900,000 CFM carbs. That's what you're going to find on them, is these real skinny ones. These ones are the originals of what came out of not only the parts car, but the original carb on my car. As you can see, they're not skinny at all. They're very fat. And these are meant for, they're very, come on now, camera. It's not going to focus. Whatever. These are very lean rods. There we go. So you're not going to get very much fuel at all out of these, which, based on the way that this carb is supposed to run, the way that the computer wants to run it, is a very lean running carburetor. So that's going to impact your fuel flow tremendously. So let me explain what happened with this one and why this is actually a danger. I'm going to have to call Speedway and see if I can get not only a refund, but maybe some compensation or something, because this is just absurd. Those extra, those racing rods, what would have happened here is that without the return spring, without the check ball, without the plug that goes in this well here, without all that stuff, when you're driving down the highway, those metering rods are going to be allowing more gas into the carburetor than it can burn off. So it's going to be filling up with gas quicker than it can burn it, and that's not efficient for starters. But usually, your mixture control solenoid, this doodad over here, is going to see based on the plunger that sticks down into this hole here, it's going to see, oh God, we're filling up with fuel. We need to cut the fuel flow off a little bit so that he can burn off the fuel with it, so the carb doesn't flood, right? But the return spring that controls the level at which the mixture control solenoid sits was missing. So that mixture control, the float is going to keep rising. The mixture control solenoid is going to stay where it's at, and gas is just going to keep pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring into the carb, and you're going to see this. The bowl filled completely up with gas, this well filled completely up with gas, and there's supposed to be a plug in here so it can't do that, right? But it's all full of gas. So what happened is, as it was running, and the gas just kept rising, it got to the point where it, locked up the engine, it stalled the engine, it flooded the car while it was running, which is very hard to do. And all this gas that had filled up in this well here in the bowl overflowed over the top of the carburetor and spilled out onto the intake. And this is all because it had the wrong metering rods. It was missing the check ball and the return spring, and it was missing the plug for this well, because if this well hadn't filled up, the float, the top of the air horn would have kept the gas in the bowl. It wouldn't have come out. But there's nothing in between this and open air that would have prevented that. So it imploded, really. It filled up with fluid, and all the fluid just spilled out of all the orifices everywhere. And then once the car finally ignited, all that gas went up in flames and destroyed everything. So, moral of this story is, think twice about buying a carburetor from Speedway Motors, because true, this one could be an outlier. It could be, just a fluke. Maybe it was an off day. Maybe they had a new guy working, whatever. But you'd think there'd be a little more quality control than to allow a unit like this to pass by and get shipped out to somebody. This is terrible. This is dangerous. If this happened while I was driving, like if it ignited and burnt down while I was driving, I might not have known that it was on fire, and it could have been it could have been really dangerous. It could have gone down the fuel line and blown up the gas tank. It could have been really bad if it didn't happen the way that it did. So this is really dangerous. It really is. So guys, if you're looking at getting a quadrajet or a dual jet or anything from Speedway Motors, I would highly recommend looking into different options, because this is not a success story. This is not something that you want to have on your car. This is terrible. It really is. Anyway, that's my rant. That's my review for Speedway Motors. Speedway Motors carburetors, -5 out of 100 stars. They're just junk. They're horrible. It's just crap. I can't even put into words how disappointed I am with this. $400 versus $300 for a parts car. $400 into this thing that almost killed me. Yeah. Don't buy Speedway Motors carbs, guys. I'll see you in the next one.